The day my ex-wife's younger sister called me for help, I almost didn't pick up. I saw the name on my screen, Amber, and I stood there in my kitchen in Calgary, holding my phone, watching it buzz against my palm. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years. Not since the divorce. Not since everything with Paige fell apart, and I quietly disappeared from that whole side of my life, the way you disappear from a neighborhood you used to live in. You don't announce it. You just stop showing up. I picked up on the fourth ring. "Hey," she said. "I know this is weird." It was weird. But something in her voice, tired, a little embarrassed, made me stay on the line. "My name is Scott Alderman. I'm 41 years old. I spent 12 years working in commercial refrigeration, mostly servicing units for grocery chains across southern Alberta. I drive a 2019 Ford F-150 that needs new brake pads. I make a decent lasagna, and 3 years ago my wife of 7 years told me she wasn't happy and asked me to move out. I did. I found a place in Ramsey, started over, and I thought I'd done a pretty good job of closing that chapter. Then Amber called. She was moving out of her place in Lethbridge. Her roommate situation had gone sideways. I didn't ask for details, and she'd found a basement suite in Calgary, near Inglewood, which happened to be about 12 minutes from where I lived. Her boyfriend at the time had recently become her ex-boyfriend, and she didn't have a truck. She didn't have anyone with a truck, she said. Most of her friends were either out of province or working that weekend. "I wouldn't ask," she said, "except I'm kind of desperate." "It's fine," I told her, and I meant it. Amber was 28. She'd always been decent to me, even after things with Paige went bad. She'd sent me a card when I moved out, just a plain card, nothing printed inside, and she'd written "Take care of yourself" in her loopy handwriting. It was one of 3 people who acknowledged that I was also going through something. I hadn't forgotten that, so I said yes. I borrowed a utility trailer from my buddy Kevin, drove down to Lethbridge on a Saturday morning in October, and spent the day loading and unloading boxes. It was one of those Alberta fall days that can't decide what it wants to be. Sun in the morning, then this low gray ceiling rolling in off the Rockies by noon, cold enough to make your breath show. We didn't talk much while we worked, just music from her phone, the scrape of furniture on hardwood, the particular satisfaction of fitting things into tight spaces. It was late afternoon when we got everything into her new place. The basement suite was small but decent, good bones as people say. High ceilings for a basement, proper windows, a little gas fireplace in the corner of the living room that she was clearly already in love with. I helped her slide the couch into place, set up her bed frame, bring in the boxes marked kitchen and stack them near the counter. We ordered Thai food from a place nearby and sat on the floor of her half-unpacked living room eating pad CU out of containers. She'd found a candle somewhere in one of the boxes and lit it. Outside, it had started raining. That thin, sideways kind of October rain that sounds like static against the window. "Thank you," she said. "Seriously, I didn't know who else to call. Don't worry about it." She picked at her for a moment. Then, "Does it feel weird being here? Here as in Calgary or here as in your apartment?" "Here as in helping me, after everything." I thought about it honestly. "A little," I said, "but not in a bad way." She nodded like that made sense to her. I stayed another hour, helped her hang the curtain rod in her bedroom because the walls were plaster and needed anchors. She handed me things from her toolbox, which was more organized than mine, and we figured it out together. Normal stuff, easy. When I was getting ready to leave, I noticed a box sitting by the front door that hadn't made it to a room yet. It was taped shut, smaller than the others, and the label said letters Kotak in black marker. Something about it caught my eye. Not in a snooping way, just the way you notice things when you're standing still for a second. The top corner of the box had a water stain on it, old, like it had been sitting in storage for a while. "What room does this go?" I asked. She was in the kitchen. A beat passed before she answered. "Just leave it by the door. I'll deal with it later." I set it down and grabbed my jacket. I drove home thinking about nothing in particular. The rain on the highway, the trailer hitched behind me, swaying slightly on the curves. I thought maybe that was the end of it. A nice afternoon, a favor returned, a small bridge back to something I thought I'd lost. I was wrong about that. She texted me 2 days later to say the curtain rod was holding, and the pad CU place had become her new obsession. I texted back a thumbs up. Then she texted again the following week to ask if I knew anything about baseboards, because hers were cold, and she thought there might be a draft. I told her what to look for. Then she called to say she'd found it and fixed it herself, and was unreasonably proud of herself about it. It became a thing. Weekly, then a couple of times a week. She'd ask about something practical. the building, the neighborhood, a restaurant recommendation, and it would stretch into an actual conversation. She was funny in a quiet way, the kind of person who'd make a dry observation and then not wait around for you to laugh at it. She was working remotely for an engineering firm, doing technical writing. She ran along the Bow River on Sunday mornings. She had opinions about pizza that I disagreed with strongly. I told myself it was just two people who happened to have this weird historical connection, being neighborly. I told myself that for about 6 weeks. One Thursday evening she called and said she'd been given last-minute tickets to a Flames game from a colleague who couldn't go, and did I want to come, and I said yes without pausing long enough to think about what I was saying yes to. We stood in line for hot chocolates at the Scotiabank Saddledome, and I watched her argue cheerfully with the guy ahead of us about some call in the previous period, and I thought very clearly, in a way I immediately tried to push back down, I'm in trouble here. I drove home that night, and sat in my truck in the parking lot of my building for a while before going inside. The thing you have to understand about Paige is that she didn't leave because of anything dramatic. There was no affair, no blowout fight, no single moment I could point to and say, there, that's where it broke. She just said she felt like she'd been disappearing inside the marriage, that she'd made herself smaller over the years and she didn't know who she was anymore, and she needed to find out. It was honest. I respected it, even when it gutted me. We sold the house in Tuscany, divided things up, and went our separate ways. I hadn't dated anyone seriously since 3 years. I'd been on a handful of dates, mostly set up by Kevin's wife, and they'd all been perfectly fine, and I'd never called any of them back. I'd started to think maybe I just wasn't built for it anymore, that I'd had my shot and it hadn't worked out and that was okay. Amber made me think maybe that wasn't true, but she was also Paige's sister. Younger sister, sure. They weren't close. There was a 5-year gap and something unresolved between them that I'd never fully understood, a tension that surfaced at family dinners and then got buried again before one would look at it directly. Still, the math of it seemed wrong. I kept showing up. We got dinner at a place in Inglewood she wanted to try. We walked around Nose Hill Park on a gray Sunday because she said she'd never been and I said it was worth it. She talked about wanting to go back to school for her master's eventually, environmental something. I talked about maybe getting my electrician certification since refrigeration and electrical work overlapped enough that it made sense. We talked about our families. She talked about her parents' marriage, which had been difficult. I talked about my dad, who'd died the year before Paige and I separated, and how I still sometimes reached for my phone to call him before I remembered. She didn't fill that silence with something useless. She just said, "I'm sorry," and left it there. I think that was the night I understood I had an actual problem. I was trying to figure out how to handle it, talking myself out of it, giving myself reasons, making rules when Paige called. It was a Wednesday morning. I was at a commercial kitchen in the Northeast, servicing a walk-in unit, when my phone rang. I stepped outside and stood in the cold with my gloves half on. "I heard Amber moved to Calgary," she said. No preamble. "Yeah," I said, "she did. Are you two seeing each other?" There was something in her voice I couldn't name right away. Not anger exactly. Something tighter than that. "We've hung out a few times," I said carefully. "Hung out." She repeated it like she was testing the weight of the words. "She's your sister, Paige. I'm not going to pretend I don't know her. I'm not asking you to pretend anything." A pause. "I just think it's a little strange that the two of you are suddenly spending time together." She moved 12 minutes from me. "She didn't know anyone here. I helped her move in." "She asked you to help her move in. She needed someone with a truck, Scott." Her voice shifted, lower, more careful. "I'm not trying to start something. I just want to make sure everyone's being thoughtful. I think we're both being thoughtful," I said. "Okay." Another pause. "Good." She hung up. I stood there in the parking lot for a minute before I went back inside. I didn't tell Amber about the call right away. I sat on it for a few days, which is what I do when I don't know how to handle something. I turned it over in my head at night, at stoplights, while I was eating cereal for dinner because I hadn't gone to the grocery store. The thing that bothered me wasn't that Paige had called. It was the question underneath the question. She hadn't asked, "Are you two friends?" She'd asked, "Are you seeing each other?" Which meant she'd already gotten far enough down the road in her head to land there. Which meant someone had said something, or she'd intuited something, or she knew something about Amber that I didn't. That last possibility was the one that kept snagging. I ended up asking Amber directly, because I've learned over the years that circling around things only makes them bigger. We were at her place on a Friday evening. She'd made soup, something with lentils and smoked paprika that was better than it had any right to be, and we were eating at her small kitchen table. I put down my spoon and said, "Paige called me." Amber went still. Not dramatically, just still. "When?" "Wednesday." She looked at her bowl. "What did she say?" She asked if we were Spanish for each other. A long pause. The rain had come back. It had been a wet November and it tapped against the small window above her kitchen sink. "What did you say?" Amber asked. "I said we'd hung out." "Which is true." She nodded slowly. "Is there something I should know?" I asked. "About why she'd be calling, about whatever's between the two of you." She was quiet for long enough that I thought maybe she wasn't going to answer. Then she got up, went to the living room, and came back with something in her hand. She set it on the table between us. It was a postcard. Old, the edges soft with handling. On the front was a picture of the Calgary skyline, one of those tourist shots from the 80s, before half the downtown towers existed. On the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, were 2 lines. "I think I made the wrong choice. I think I've always known that." No name, no address, no date. I looked up at her. "There are more," she said. "About 11 of them, all from Calgary. Addressed to our mother, never sent." She sat back down. "I found them in a box in my parents' storage unit about 3 years ago when I was helping them move. I never told Paige. I never told anyone. I just took them and kept them." Who wrote them?" "I don't know. I've spent a long time thinking about it." She looked at the postcard, not at me. "My mother had a whole life before she met my dad. There's a lot my dad never talked about. There's a lot my mom never talked about. But whoever wrote these, they were in Calgary, and they clearly loved her, and they clearly regretted letting her go." I sat with that for a moment. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. She looked at me then. Directly, the way she'd been working up to for a while. "Because Paige has always needed to be the person who got there first," she said. "With guys, with choices, with everything. And I've spent my whole life standing to the side, making sure I didn't take up too much space." She paused. "I found these postcards and I kept asking myself, what happens to the person who just doesn't say it? Who writes the words and never sends them? Who lets the moment pass because it seemed easier?" The rain kept tapping. "I'm not saying anything I shouldn't say," she added quietly. "I'm just tired of being the person who keeps postcards in a box." I understood what she was telling me. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't know how I felt, but because I'd learned the hard way that saying the right thing badly is worse than waiting. I thought about Paige's call, and the question underneath the question. I thought about the card Amber had sent me when I moved out, "Take care of yourself," and how it had felt like the only honest thing anyone said to me that whole year. I thought about Nose Hill Park in the gray November light, and the Flames game, and lentil soup better than it had any right to be. "I called Paige back," I said. Amber blinked. "The morning after she called me. I told her that whatever was happening between you and me was something I was going to take seriously, and that I thought she deserved to hear that from me rather than around it." I looked at her. She didn't take it well at first, but I think she got there. Amber stared at me. "You already called her, yeah. When were you going to tell me that?" "About 30 seconds ago." Something moved across her face that I couldn't fully read. Relief, maybe, or something more complicated than that. "You could have told me before I went and got the postcards," she said. "You would have gotten the postcards anyway," I said. "You've been wanting to show someone those for 3 years. She laughed. A short, surprised sound, like she hadn't planned to. She put her face in her hands for a moment. I reached across the table and touched the back of her wrist. Just that. She didn't pull away. We didn't make any declarations that night. We finished the soup. I helped her wash up. We sat on the couch and watched part of a documentary about the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway, which sounds absurd, but she'd mentioned wanting to watch it weeks ago and I'd remembered. Around 10 o'clock I pulled on my jacket and she walked me to the door. She held onto my hand a beat longer than she had to when she said goodbye. That was November. By January I was spending most weekends in Inglewood. By February I'd met her friends. She'd met Kevin and his wife, and we'd settled into something that felt, cautiously, carefully, like it might be real. Paige and I talked twice more. It wasn't easy, and I won't pretend it was. There was a phone call in December where she said things that were hard to hear, and I said things back that I'd been holding for a while, and we both went quiet at the end, and she finally said, "I hope you're happy, Scott. I actually mean that." I told her I hope the same for her. I do. There are things you carry from a marriage. Not all of them bad. I carried the knowledge that you can be a decent person and still lose something important. That silence in a relationship isn't always peaceful. That sometimes the person you should have been paying attention to was standing right there, and you just weren't looking. I found the postcards again in March, when Amber was reorganizing. She'd kept them in that same small box, tucked onto the shelf of her bedroom closet. I picked one up and read it. I think I made the wrong choice. I think I've always known that. I don't know who wrote that. I don't know what they were reaching for, or what they let slip by, or whether they ever found their way to it eventually. But I know what it means to almost be that person, to almost box something up and leave it on a shelf. Some nights, when Amber's asleep and I'm the last one up, and the city outside her window is doing that quiet Calgary thing, where the cold makes everything clear. And still, I think about the Saturday we spent loading furniture into a trailer in Lethbridge, while the weather couldn't make up its mind. I think about her voice on the phone. I know this is weird, and the fact that I answered on the fourth ring. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't.